Start tonight with details of a man who was arrested after a high-speed car chase that ended with some help from civilians.
His neighbors say they received death threats in the week leading up to his arrest. TV 20's Ethan Badowski tells us why this reckless behavior is not a surprise to people living close to the suspect.
They said he was a little bit off.
Fred Aubrey lives in northeast Gainesville across the street from James Davis, who was arrested Sunday after leading police on a high-speed car chase. Aubrey said he had never met Davis before last Friday when he had an interesting encounter with him.
My visiting nurse came by and left. We were talking at the car. She backed out, and he comes streaming down the road in his red car, and he pointed out the window at me and said, "I've got you," and followed her out towards 13th Street very closely. I'd say within 10 to 15 feet.
I spoke with two of Davis's neighbors. They live in this house right next to me, and he lives right behind them in that house there. They told me they were too afraid to speak on camera until they knew Davis would remain in jail and no longer pose a threat to them. The neighbors say Davis threatened to kill them in the week leading up to his arrest. They say they reported the threats, but claim police told them they had higher priorities to attend to. His neighbors say he was Baker acted on Friday and returned less than 72 hours later. 2 days later, he was arrested after he fled from a robbery. Davis led police on a dangerous chase down 13th Street that ended here in the parking lot at Rogers Realty, where civilians boxed in his car to prevent him from getting away. Davis was previously arrested in 2019 for indecent exposure. He is facing charges of aggravated assault, burglary, resisting an officer, and fleeing. In Gainesville, Ethan Badowski, TV 20 News.